the cities and the towns. There's a fear from the inside and the coil all around. I've been hoping for my help, find the cure to come and save.
Hello and welcome to Critical Mass TV. It is Sunday, August 31st, 2014, and I am your host, Brad Hartley. As always, it is really good to be here, and of course I know that you missed me. We are broadcasting from the VCAM studios in beautiful Burlington, Vermont. The opinions expressed are of the speaker and not necessarily those of Vermont Community Access Media, even though they should be. As always, thanks go to Jim Kelty, VCAM technician, the great local band, the Aerolites, for the use of Have You Read the News, and tonight to videographer Arthur Hines, for his great work on tonight's featured videos shot at the recent Climate Justice Convergence at Wheelock Mountain Farm, which was organized by 350 Vermont and Rising Tide Vermont. Of course, also with the participation of great folks from all around the Northeast. If you haven't heard, on September 21st, many thousands of people are orchestrating the People's Climate March in New York City. This giant get-together is being held to both show the delegates who will be attending the UN Climate Summit the seriousness of the situation and to further build the unified climate justice movement in the United States. So how about some mixed mental arts for your intellectual self-defense? Without further ado, here are the promised videos shot and edited by Arthur Hines. The first involves the opening panel discussion held at the Northeast Climate Convergence that I mentioned previously. The second is some highlights of an action in Montpelier at the State House and in the general area that followed the weekend at Wheelock Mountain Farm called the Climate Cabaret. We also have some interviews that Jim and I did about the importance of climate justice, and these will follow Arthur's work. Could you roll those videos for me, Jim?
I crazily somehow ended up calling myself a tar sands organizer. Never thought that my life mission would end up with me fighting tar sands. Didn't even know what the thing was, but that's what I do pretty much all the time now. And how I got there was, we were in 350 Vermont. We, like a lot of folks, we heard about this KXL pipeline, go down to Washington, D.C., do this big action, organize a bunch of people to show up and have make a big political impact. And that was a lot of what our organizing was, at a certain stage. And it was fun, and I learned a lot about tar sands. But then some folks that I knew, including some of the people in this room, started talking about this pipeline that actually goes right through Vermont that had a tar sands potential. And that really became the road to kind of a transition for me of the difference between doing these really big mega actions, which have their place in our movement building process, and working with people in my own community on something that's local, that has meaning and impact in our lives, that we feel impacted by and we care about, and seeing the difference between how people engage. It's almost and I don't mean to critique it, but it's a little artificial when it's this big event that is not a part of your day-to-day life and something that's actually a part of your day-to-day life. And I began to really appreciate how much more potent that was. And I was working a lot with the Worker Center and different things at that point, and saw a lot of the power of local organizing. And so gradually just started shifting more towards helping local groups like 350 Vermont get started and take on local fights in their area, the things that matter to them, which it all ties together to stopping, a really bad development that's having a major impact on our global, climate. But there's real things that happen in our day-to-day lives that we can really engage at. And so it's not one or the other, it's finding the synergy between those two. But that was, I think, kind of led me to the kind of organizing I do now, which is primarily helping local communities fight, things that are damaging their lives, and take on and build power locally. So.
Thank you all for sharing those stories. I'm just moved and reminds me how
I was a college student and there was a war, and I was active about that and constantly was just being like, oh, well, we can be more creative than this. Like, we don't have to follow the protest model of stand here with a sign. And so often I was going to meetings and the conversations were like, oh, what should the banner say? Or like, what should the t-shirt say? But no thought was gone into the aesthetics of the presentation. So I found myself just stepping forward and saying, okay, well, I'll paint the banner. Or, I facilitated mural projects before. It's kind of the same process. And then I remember one day there was sort of this, and everyone loved that because it was like the best thing to have a meeting and have this guy be like, oh, and then he'll do the work. And I was happy to help. And then there was just this one meeting where there was going to be this march, and there was going to be a banner at the front, and I just said, well, this time the message is going to get decided by the people that paint the banner. So if you want to have a say in what it says, come and paint it with us. And that was the moment that I started organizing with other artists, and we spoke the same language, and we could talk visually and understand each other and talk about things that didn't yet exist because we could imagine them. And then, so since then, I've sort of spun into really working with encouraging artists to take a leadership role in organizing and encouraging everyone to embrace creativity because of it's so vital to how we communicate the heart of what our movement's about.
the next thing I wanted to ask you about was about climate justice and what that word means to you, that phrase, and maybe how your perspective has changed on what climate justice means. I think probably in this room too, we have a lot of that phrase may be new to people. It may be, you may have a very developed understanding of what that means to you. So I thought that would be interesting to hear from these panelists on that. Maybe we could start with Kevin this time.
Sure. Yeah, it's so as context, I live in Spain, or in Catalonia, and I work as part of a global team, the global team on 350. So my perspective, I'm actually more connected to what's happening in other places than here. So hopefully I can bring some of that global perspective in. And I think the movement for climate justice is, we have to look at it in the context of coming out of the movement for global justice, or the anti-globalization movement, which is where we first saw the globe coming together in this sort of and realizing its own power and feeling that, and the climate justice movement, I think in many ways has grown out of that. The tactics have changed in many ways, and many of the people have changed, but it is still the same concept of global solidarity, which at its root calls into question the most foundational principles of our sort of monotheistic patriarchal nation-state arrangement that we have. And there are many, and the Zapatistas, I think, have been sort of leaders in both of those, in the ideas of articulating not only another world is possible, but we want a world in which many worlds exist, and that people have the space to make their own decisions. And I think more and more as we're seeing what climate change resistance or organizing looks like is kind of what David was just saying. Of it looks like people organizing locally about what works for them, and the climate justice issue is in many ways the right. It's not. It's about politics itself. It's about what are these structures by which the decisions get made. I think it's less about what decision gets made. It's more about how and who is behind these decisions and those processes. And so looking at that in this concept, I find it really useful to talk about climate change as a symptom. We're not struggling, we're not fighting climate change. That's the symptom of what we are struggling against. And that is sort of this many-headed hydra, which is why it's so dangerous to the powers that be, because it is everywhere and everyone, and needs to be kept down. Otherwise, everything will change, fortunately, soon.
Well, I think continuing with what I said before, kind of seeing how much more potent organizing is when it's done by local people around local issues, and connecting those in some ways to the global issues, but also to other larger political and national issues as well. They're not separate, but the organizing, the actual work, is so much more energetic and grounded when people are really working in their community. And I think maybe the thing that I've kind of witnessed that you probably have all shared or heard about, but I'll use it as a good example, I think, of what I've seen and what's affected me a lot, is the work, and there's a lot of folks that have worked a lot on that here, is the work in South Portland. That was just a win in South Portland, where the folks in Maine passed an ordinance in South Portland to ban any infrastructure to be built around crude oil exports or offloading from a pipeline. And it's probably the first out-and-out solid tar sands win, I want to say, in North America at this point, where it looks like it's in the win column, although there's a lot of things that they're going to try to do in terms of legal and other things that it's not done as a fight, but it's definitely in the win column more than a lot of other things have been so far. And it's a huge local win.
They'll be here tomorrow night.
Yeah, they will. And so I'll just tell the preview of that. You can all hear the actual folks that did all the work tomorrow. But the thing that was so powerful was just that the commitment level was off the charts, for people to come in and do the work there. There's a town of 23,000 people, and the whole region, including Vermont and New Hampshire and Massachusetts, and the whole region came in to help the locals take on ExxonMobil, which is like the largest company in the history of companies, basically. And they had tons and tons of resources and tons of money. I think they put in $750,000 to win an election of like 19,000 people. And so you figure out what that is by vote, and they won. They used their power. They won that election, and they lost the issue because of the way that they did it and the way that people got involved and the way that people modeled their commitment and changed the town's perspective, on what was happening. People talked to their neighbors, and they heard their neighbors saying how bad tar sands was, and it was those one-on-one relationships at a close and personal level that changed people's hearts. And it was the chance to work in your own community about something you care about that got people more committed. And I think that is what we're trying to do, in all the ways that we can, is strengthen and support and build from the ground up in communities, so that communities have the wherewithal, the skills, and the resources to fight these monstrous organizations, and that have no care except for profit. That's the only driving issue. And it's a moral fight. It was a really interesting thing. I sat in a town hall meeting in New Hampshire, a little town hall meeting in New Hampshire, and heard the CEO of the company, Portland Montreal Pipeline, just in the very early stages of this fight, just talking about how good their company was, their safety record, they take care of their employees, they were in the audience with their employees. They were the CEO was really good at selling their organization, and you could tell actually he was there from his heart. It wasn't fake. But the town took him on. It was a meeting maybe a little bit bigger than this, and the townspeople took him on. They were knowledgeable, they were informed, they were committed, and they were willing to basically refute everything that he said. By the end of that meeting, he was like a deflated individual. He was, he realized he was on the wrong side of the issue. It wasn't just that the facts were the wrong side of the issues, but the moral imperatives that were in that room and the conviction of the people that were there, he could really feel. This was not inherently a bad man. This was just a man that was on the wrong side of history and the wrong side of an issue. The company's in disarray. He's gone. Other employees have left. So the local fights made by people who care on the right side of moral issues, that's where the power is, and that's where our future is. So. And lots of the folks here could talk much more intelligently about that than I can.
For me, the climate justice question is embedded in the very basic scientific facts of climate change. So there will be, or there is going to be, or there already is in the process no greater set of oncoming injustices that would set many of our movements back decades if we have a civilization that emerges out of the next 150 years. For me, the question of justice is one of how you make visible, as David was saying, how you make visible and clear the moral implications of what is so often a hidden system of injustice, a system that looks really clean when you flip the light switch on, and at the other end of that is a blown up mountain, a river with toxic slag in it, a community that's destroyed in Appalachia, a community that is dying of asthma and cancer in southeastern Massachusetts. All the while, everywhere along the chain, some set of rich folks is extracting the value of each of those communities. So for me, the big justice challenge is trying to make visible and clear what those lines are so that people's moral conscience kicks in. So that, when something is as visible and clear as a pipeline that is going to be running through this state and two other states, and you can make clear the implications of that and see it visibly, people can start to take their own initiative and their own hearts get moved. I'm continually amazed at the number of people who had no idea there was a huge coal plant in southeastern Massachusetts, even though that's the one of the closest, if not the closest plant that generates electricity to where they are. And just the simple fact that of disclosing the reality of this enormous, massive piece of infrastructure that's doing this enormous injustice to everyone along the chain allows people to weigh in and allows people to see where their moved hearts could go in terms of changing the course. So for me, the word climate justice hits at every single point along that path, in the extraction, in the burning, and then in the future.
I guess climate justice means to me like putting the word climate before everything that we need justice for in our communities, especially as it relates to classism and racism and the ways that plays out in our communities, essentially. And in the Just Transition Framework, which was in the Kent Astoria, I don't know if folks saw that today, that word was used. Have folks heard of Just Transition before? Or, yeah, nodding. Okay, there's going to be a workshop about it tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. Little plug. So if you'd like to explore that topic a little bit more, Keith and I are going to be doing that tomorrow morning. But essentially, long story short, it was sort of proposed by labor unions, and then the UN adopted it in treaties and things like that starting in 2009. I first started to learn about it because the Worker Center is on it's a board member of Grassroots Global Justice and the Climate Justice Alliance, and that's where I got introduced to this framework. And sort of like in my introduction, it helped to reinforce that sort of linking the class consciousness to environmental rights for me. So just transition basically means we have to do this together, right? So the communities that are where the extracting and polluting industries are, they need to have a dignified livelihood to go through that transition. The communities that are dependent upon, which is pretty much all of us, dependent upon those industries, also need to have their fundamental human needs met. And we meet our human needs by guaranteeing our human rights in society. So this is the right to safe housing, the right to health care, healthy food, transportation, the right to mobility, the right to dignified work that you can support a family on, the right to education. These are all areas where we can have an impact by building solidarity between the labor and environmental movements around climate justice. So the framework that the Just Transition framework talks about it in the sense of pathways, right? So if the environmental movement is fighting tar sands and other sorts of fuel that New England in particular needs for heat and energy, then it's like, how can we actually create new jobs in our communities where we have more efficient housing? How can we partner with the labor movement, which, to be frank, like, there's a lot of wedges between these two movements, and those wedges are exploited by people who are wanting to keep us dependent on this kind of energy sources and on these systems that are denying us our human rights. So I think, like, the climate justice movement, putting it into a human context, because, a lot of folks, they're not really thinking about survival of the species. They're just kind of trying to survive next month, right? So the massiveness of what we're up against on the climate level is kind of hard to relate to. I think denialists are in denial because their entire livelihoods are built into this system. They are afraid, right? So what we are saying to them is scary, right? Meanwhile, our labor, whether we're in unions or not, and most of us aren't in unions, has to be put into a climate context, right? So the ways in which we work, the kind of jobs that we're creating in our communities, these are being created by folks that are vested in the systems that are basically killing us in our communities. So how can we create our own jobs? How can we create resilient, relocalized economies that actually create dignified work and solve the climate crisis at the same time? Because we need to transition together, we need to survive together. And I think this helps us by sort of building our analysis and making sure that our work is linking these things together more and more every day. It's how we're going to build this sort of mass movement of this scale, like David was talking about, that's actually going to be needed to win, right? It's going to take masses and masses of more people making these connections and linking our human rights to our right to a healthy environment.
I guess I'm wondering what the strategy is if after the last ones, people felt like the UN, like climate justice happening through the UN is a dead issue. So I'm wondering like what the strategy is around focusing on New York City this time.
From my perspective, kind of the difference is that there isn't an expected outcome from New York. Like, there's no false hopes. This isn't the space where decisions get made about this, but this is a potential moment where it could shake things up. Things could actually, it could change how the game is being played. And so that is an exciting moment. But I'm personally not interested in that. I think there's a necessity for movements to come together to feel their own power and understand how big, diverse, and I guess capable, intelligent, resilient, creative our movement actually is. And to me, this is the utility of this moment in New York. And as if we're looking at a time scale of, you know, the time frame provided by us by climate change, this is we need to kick in now. And I'm pretty excited that there is this space around this. And I don't, from my experience in the UN, it's amazing. It's people from all over the world sitting down and talking in a consensus-based decision making. It's very similar to the squats I organize in Spain. It's a very similar process. The difference is who is in those conversations. And I think in this, I hope some of the critique starts to come to that deeper level of who is showing up in these conversations, who is missing from that, what voices are missing, and making sure that it's precisely those voices that we as a collective are lifting up, because they're the ones not represented inside that system.
Does anyone else want to take on that?
Well, I would just kind of add, I think, you know, in one sense, what this is one of the outcomes of the climate march. And this is maybe, you know, it's a big moment. It may change narrative. It may, you know, kind of put us into a game-changing moment in our kind of movement. And these big things have had catalytic effects in our movement building. And this has that potential. And it could be a setup for other you know, UN-based negotiation. But more importantly, it's the fact that labor and social justice and climate justice and faith groups, we have never seen the kind of organizing that's going on. It's not no single group at all is managing this anymore. It's like, it's a wildfire that started. It's a conversation that's going on around North America and I think around the globe to some degree. So we don't really know where that conversation will lead. And I think it's the most important thing that can happen is just that we are having it. And we're, you know, we're organizing as a community in ways we never have before. So that's the exciting thing, I think. You know, we'll get to see, you know, a lot of people in the street, and who knows what that'll look like. But what happens before and what happens after as a result of that, I think that's the real, you know, energy. That's the real opportunity.
I think I just want to say a little bit about my perspective in terms of movement versus decision makers as a dynamic. For me, the march in New York is. I have a friend who has this metaphor of like, in terms of building a movement, there have to be a lot of things that are just like brushing your teeth. The things that you do when you wake up in the morning because they have to be done. And for me, like going to New York is one of those, and it's really great to hear and amazing to watch all the forces that are coming together and the new things that are happening because of that. For me personally, I guess my perspective on the movement and how it relates to decision makers is that we're not going to be able to force at this moment our decision makers to make the decisions that need to be made. We're not that powerful. We don't have that much money, and we don't have that many people yet who are organized systematically to make that sort of pressure game happen. We can in little places here and there, but I look at I've been interested looking at how the marriage equality movement has gotten where it did. And it didn't go about attacking and pressuring people at the top. It went about in a myriad, thousands of little ways, in churches, in businesses, in communities, in states all across the country, of creating the moral narrative around what is right action and what is wrong action. And then, you know, in the last 3 years, almost every politician in the country has woken up, realized the ground has completely changed underneath them, and evolved. Not because anyone forced them to do it, and no one, you know, surrounded the White House and locked their arms to it. Although I'm all in favor of that. the ground shifted of what was acceptable as a public policy choice, and the narrative changed because there was a moral element that came into the conversation. And I think things like the Portland tar sands work, local stuff that happens everywhere, whether that's in small communities, in churches, in business organizations, it's all those pieces together, finding out where your individual strong part is and transforming the moral dialogue around the issue in those places that spreads and builds that power. So I'm looking forward to being in New York and brushing my teeth, and then where we go next is what's really interesting for me. As a Quaker, we unfortunately don't have any leaders to help anyone take strong moral stands. But I think one of the things my friend here is talking from the arts perspective about the creativity quotient that comes in when you come from an artistic perspective. I think we need that same perspective in the movement more broadly, and that perspective can also come out of the faith tradition, in that fundamentally a faith tradition is how do we take and bring to earth the completely unimaginable? How do we create a reality in our lived daily lives of things that are beyond our imagination, and create newness out of just what arrives out of our hearts? So I think faith communities have a huge role to play, and we're not there yet. A lot of our faith communities, and as a Quaker, our Quaker community in New England is primarily well-educated, affluent, academic-y white people who are very entrenched in the worldview that allows them to maintain their privilege as it is. And there is such a hunger for change and such an incredible amount of fear of what that change looks like for each individual's life. We're going to need to move through that faith place. We're going to have to faith to get from A to B. I don't know how that's going to play out. But there are people in every tradition who are trying to in many ways rebuild their tradition and rebuild their prophetic tradition, which has been lost over the centuries of privilege and power, to find new voices that awaken our consciousness. So I'm hoping we shall see.
In sort of a tangible thing in terms of what's happening, specifically around in the UK, really amazing divestment work is happening with faith groups that are the UK. That this is happening quickly and all over the US as well, and a bit in Australia, and in Sweden and a few other places around Europe. Congregations are really pressuring the money behind their institution and saying this is not in alignment with our values, and as I'm not gonna. I was gonna say as a pagan, the sort of people taking direct relationship to this earth, I think is happening largely in many ways, and that is challenging the representational structures we have in our politics and our religion.
In times of crisis, they look towards faith for answers. And in this moment where many of our human needs are being put at risk because of the climate crisis, it's going to be the leadership within faith or entire congregations that are going to need to be visible and active leaders, because they're the ones that are going to be, to a large degree, helping to provide solace and guidance and hopefully activate people too. So we've seen a lot of great examples of faith being at the front of the line for these kind of social justice struggles, and the Moral Mondays that are happening in North Carolina right now to sort of to call the question on the morality of some of the day-to-day struggles that people are going through.
I wanted to follow up on your second comment, which I think is really interesting, about how we, in these local things, and with the thousand flowers blooming idea of we got to go after this and illustrate the climate problem in our own localities to make it visible and visceral to people. I think there is a great danger when we spend a lot of time talking about the local environmental impacts and the economic impacts. I think one of the things that the environmental movement has failed to do consistently is actually put climate at the forefront. And we are decades behind because we have been emphasizing the Ogallala Aquifer or the various other environmental but not climate pieces to those infrastructure, those pieces to the puzzle. And one of the things that was our real goal in blockading Brayton Point was to make a pure climate argument that yes, the asthma is bad, yes, the cancer is terrible, yes, the extraction is a problem, but we need to be able to figure out how to make purely climate arguments about closing down existing fossil fuel infrastructure today if we're actually going to make it across the line where we need to get. So I'm really interested in that question, and I really would love to figure out and see more examples of making the pure climate argument something.
I think today was a great example of the power that we have as a collective when we come together, when we work together. We've already accomplished a lot of we've had a lot of really great victories. Some friends of ours over in Maine have already stopped a tar sands port in South Portland, and we're here today to celebrate the victories like that. And I think it was an excellent way to just come together, celebrate our victories, and get energized for what's to come.
We had a whole bunch of really fun and creative stuff going on. We had brass bands, we had puppets, we had banners, we had dancing and people marching, and we wanted to actually take it inside the building where decisions are being made and say, hey, we're actually serious about this. We're kind of clowning around and we're being creative and silly, but the real circus is going on inside the chambers where these decisions are being made, and you're not actually listening to us. And so if you're not listening to us when we're polite, we're gonna come inside, we're gonna make some noise, we're gonna let you know that we're actually here and that we're serious about the stuff that we're saying. So this protest and party that we had today was the culmination of the Northeast Regional Climate Justice Convergence. And when we look at stuff through a climate justice framework, we're recognizing that you really can't separate environmental concerns from social concerns. And that was a lot of the reason behind us taking this sort of twofold approach to what we're doing today. We're saying, Governor Shumlin, you've got to look at these social spending cuts, and you have to look at the frack gas pipeline in a totally new light. There is a lot of really amazing climate justice organizing going on in the Northeast right now. Let's take a moment to kind of recognize all the effort that we've put into this and all the amazing progress that we're making. We're fighting for this world that we want to live on, and on a bunch of fronts right now, we're winning, and that feels really awesome. And so it was super, super fun and super inspiring to get Brett and Puppet involved. yeah, we want to show people that this isn't all about chanting statistics with signs in the street. This is about celebrating where we already are and the victories we've already won, and that this can be really fun and liberating.
I'm Avery. I'm one of the folks who helped start Rising Tide Vermont, an all-volunteer grassroots organization working on climate justice stuff. And I feel like as a young person, as a worker, as someone who identifies as genderqueer, but also like as someone who has been like doing community organizing now for the past couple of years, climate justice and doing labor solidarity a lot. Like climate justice, I think, is incredibly important for how we can unite the issues of social justice, the labor movement, issues around collective liberation, racial justice, through the frame of looking at the climate crisis and what's going on with the ecological crises that are playing out right now. And I feel like it's like climate justice is really just a frame to look at the root causes of the systems that are consistently exploiting people, exploiting the land bases that we live on, and all for the purpose of profit. So climate justice is basically like a frame to look at the climate crisis through that and apply those root cause analyses of what's actually going on in these systems to like why are we now like living in a world where climate crisis is destabilizing us, basically.
Right.
So.
My name is Colton Francis. I live in Rutland, and I think climate justice is important because it's affecting people, and it's affecting the way of life that we live, and it's affecting our bodies physically, and the food that we eat. And I think that the climate justice movement is moving towards more of a social issue, because the social structure that we have has been set up in a hierarchical manner for hundreds of years, and we are beginning to address these issues on a very real level in the climate justice movement.
Yeah.
So I think climate justice is important because in addition to what I just said about the money, capitalism is driving the problem we're seeing, and capitalism is really the root of why we have to continuously extract resources. And so climate justice has come out of social movements that are opposing this process of exploitation of our land and of our labor. And climate justice is this vision of the new society that's built in ecological sustainability, workers' power. And climate justice is also a recognition that climate change does not affect us all equally. Like climate change is already happening for a lot of communities of color, a lot of the global south. It's already happening for poorer communities. And it's specifically harming already alienating and marginalized communities, because we are the ones who can't just get up and pick up and move and get a new place when climate change destroys our houses. We're the ones who, all our trailers are flooded away in my hometown in Waterbury, and there's no money to rebuild, and the state abandons the town and the economy goes to hell. So climate justice means that we have to take leadership from people who've been traditionally marginalized, even in the environmental movement, which is traditionally focused on lifestyle changes and kind of alienated a lot of working class people or people of color or women, and just the face of the movement is seen as this very white male movement. And it's really important that we combat that, because the root cause of the reason we're facing so much environmental destruction is that there are rich people who want to take our resources. And fighting that without fighting that underlying drive for profit is not going to work.
My name is Emma. I live in Montpelier, Vermont, and I'm here today for the Climate Justice Action Camp. And I guess climate justice means a livable planet for all people, regardless of race, regardless of geography, regardless of their income levels. I think climate change is definitely something that's affecting different people in different ways, and I think it makes vulnerable populations even more vulnerable. So I guess I see it as a livable planet.
My name is Rod Monroe, and I live in the Rutland County area. And I believe that the climate justice issue is important for all people, that we share the earth with, with Mother Nature, the connection we have with the earth. I believe that we have to take care of what we have here as far as the natural beauty. I also believe that climate justice includes all types of people, all age groups, all nationalities, we're all in it together. There's activities that are impacting communities of people where their lives are being destruction. The water, which is sacred to all life, which I'm a big, really a huge concern for me, is being threatened like never before. And to risk an element like a life-giving source of water for something that is only going to be used for a temporary energy fix is something that I feel is just not worth it in the long run. It's just going to devastate what we hold as dear to ourselves and to life to come, basically.
I'm Theo Talcott from Manchester, Vermont. If we don't stop the oil companies from breaking the sky, we're going to be on an unlivable planet in about 2 minutes. And so it behooves all of us who love life to work our butts off to change the way our world is run. In particular, the Vermont gas pipeline is an extremely egregious and moronic and completely over-designed malfeasance of disaster capitalism, which is like taking all this like paper money from Wall Street and shoveling it into this gigantic industrialist project, which makes no sense ecologically, which we don't need. And so that's the main thing, is like Vermont is better than this. We do not need a gigantic methane leaking pipeline all through our like farmlands, especially when that kind of stuff makes us like less likely to put solar panels on the top of the house, which is the answer to this question, which the utilities don't want to just do because there's no money in it for them to have everybody have distributed power. But but I think the Vermont gas pipeline will be stopped. I think eventually the politicians in the state will be held to account and be like, really, you want to kick old ladies off their land so you can like have this Canadian company pipe gas through Vermont to a company in New York?
A large multinational.
Doesn't seem to make a whole lot of common sense anyway.
It's just to drive profits. Thanks a lot, Theo. I really appreciate that. Thank you. Okay, and those were some very interesting pieces of video work, and I certainly hope you found that as interesting as I did. This is an article by Margaret Flowers and Kevin Zeiss entitled "Climate Crisis Connects Us, Climate Justice Requires Unity." What do rigged corporate trade agreements like the Trans-Pacific Partnership and the Paris Treaty, an international climate agreement to be signed in 2015, have in common? They are both tools being pushed by the power elite to rip away our hopes for democracy and commodify all things to monetize them for profit. In this drive by multinational corporations to patent and control even living beings such as plants and animals, and to privatize even elements that are essential to life, such as water, which connect all human beings on the planet, we are in a global battle of the people versus the plutocrats. And in this battle, this battle has a ticking timer called the climate crisis. The global financial elites meet regularly to plan their strategy and tactics. If they can't push their agenda through the World Bank, International Monetary Fund, and World Trade Organization, they move to secret, massive trade agreements. The Obama administration is negotiating 3 such agreements right now: the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, and the Trade in Services Agreement. Those agreements are stalled thanks to a movement of movements coming together to stop Congress from giving Obama fast-track trade promotion authority. Similarly, in response to the climate crisis, the United Nations has been involved in what is called the Conference of the Parties, or COP, which is part of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, which I call UNFUNC. Big corporations have taken over this process and are using it in their relentless drive to plunder the planet and exploit its living beings, which knows no limits. It will take people power to apply the brakes. Now, with the Paris Treaty, a binding international climate agreement set to be concluded in December of 2015, we must build a similarly unified movement that stops this rigged corporate agreement and puts in place real solutions to the climate crisis. We must understand that climate change affects and connects all of us, and we must be as organized as the opposition. The United Nations Climate Summit in New York this September 23rd provides an opportunity to further build this unified movement in the United States. Thousands of activists are planning to come to New York City for a march on September 21st. In the days prior to that, the global Climate Convergence, in partnership with System Change, not Climate Change, will host a conference to discuss real solutions and obstacles to change, share skills, and connect our sub-movements. This will be another step in the growing movement seeking real climate solutions in the face of corruption and dysfunction in the United Nations and United States, which have failed to address the climate crisis in meaningful ways. The United Nations statements on the climate crisis and the Obama administration's rhetoric about its climate strategy make it sound like real actions are being taken to mitigate climate change. But the reality is that both the United Nations and the U.S. government are acting on behalf of the industries that are vying to profit from the climate crisis, even as they make it worse. The UNFUNC began in 1992 as an international treaty to coordinate action around climate change. It is responsible for the Kyoto Protocol, which is set to expire in 2020. The UNFUNC currently includes 195 member states which make decisions through the COP, which was the Committee of the Parties. The COP usually meets yearly, although currently it is meeting more frequently to prepare for the Paris Treaty, which will be discussed at the COP 21 in December of 2015. Sounds great, right? Wrong. According to Ann Peterman of the Global Justice Ecology Project, which sends observers to the COP meetings and provides opportunities for frontline groups to get media attention for their work, the COP meetings are really just industry trade shows. She writes, they block any forward process in stopping catastrophic climate change while creating new and diabolical schemes for making money off of false solutions. Peterman refers to the UNFUNC as the World Carbon Trading Organization and describes it as a body that promotes neoliberal economic models, as do the World Bank and the World Trade Organization. Friends of the Earth describes the COP process as captured by corporate power to the extent that there are corporate logos everywhere, even at the meetings. At the COP19 in Poland, a concurrent meeting was held by the World Coal Association to promote the use of coal and false solutions like clean coal. The extent that there are corporate logos everywhere. At the COP19 in Poland, I'm repeating that sentence. A major false solution adopted at the COP19 meeting in Warsaw, Poland is REDD+, reducing emissions from deforestation and forest degradation. While on the surface, REDD+ sounds like a positive step by paying countries to leave their forests intact, in reality, local communities and advocates see REDD+ as a Trojan horse that will lead to the enclosure of forests, erosion of rights, and big loopholes for polluting industries. In addition to false solutions, the COP meetings are becoming increasingly restrictive and repressive. Like the World Trade Organization, they take place behind barriers where access and activity are tightly controlled. There is no tolerance of dissent, even as civil society sees the COP trading away the future of humanity and the planet, as well as delaying real solutions. The same things are happening within the United States. Although the Obama administration claims to take the climate crisis seriously, their actions are actually making it worse. The administration is promoting false and dirty solutions such as methane, a potent greenhouse gas, euphemistically called natural gas, nuclear energy, and taking ineffective steps to curtail emissions. Obama's all-of-the-above energy strategy allows for carbon polluting and nuclear energy to continue while investing inadequately in efficient use of energy, as well as development of solar, wind, and tidal and other sustainable energy solutions. Obama's Office of Management and Budget has also been intervening to weaken pollution standards. Treaties like the TPP and TAFTA being negotiated by Obama will increase fracking and the export of coal, oil, and gas. The U.S. is in preparation to excavate land for tar sands extraction in Utah and Alabama and Kentucky, even though that will permanently decimate the land and harm local communities. while pouring more carbon into the air. The administration has approved the southern half of the Keystone Pipeline, which is bringing tar sands from Alberta, Canada to the Gulf of Mexico for processing and export. And the Obama administration has approved seismic testing for offshore drilling, even though the testing will maim and kill marine animals and the drilling will set the stage for more disasters like the BP leak in the Gulf of Mexico. The recent EPA rules proposed by Obama, which have been applauded by big green nonprofits, are totally inadequate. Ken Ward writes in Truth Out that the emissions scheme is near to useless as policy and comes embedded in a pro-gas and oil plan. And Sean Sweeney of the Trade Unions for Energy Democracy reports that progress in implementing sustainable energy is also inadequate. At a time when the climate crisis is here and we must mobilize quickly to mitigate and adapt to it, drastic and coordinated actions are necessary. It's all connected. This is where the need for a movement of movements to stop the Paris Treaty from being a boon to industry and a death blow for all living things comes in. There are solutions to the climate crisis, but like all other real solutions, they will have to come from organized and mobilized people at the grassroots level. Over the last several decades, there has been a growing awareness of the climate crisis, but somehow it was relegated to being an environmental issue and ignored by groups working on other issues. This was a mistake, and it's time to correct it. The climate crisis has its roots in the same soil as all of the other crises we face: corporate domination of public policy and promotion of neoliberal economic models that seek to own and enclose all things, goods and services for profit, despite the harm this causes people and the planet. The climate crisis affects everything and we care about, beginning with the water we drink and the food we eat. According to the National Climate Assessment Report 2014, water shortages are expected to worsen and the quality of water will be diminished. Cities, particularly in the Southwest, are draining their aquifers at unsustainable levels. Combined with the push to privatize municipal water, we can expect the price of water to rise and public access decrease. Water shutoffs like we are seeing in Detroit will become more widespread, and climate change will lead to more crop failures, especially if big ag continues to dominate the food system and employ unsustainable practices that strip the soil of resiliency and plant monocrops. The NSA, its allies, and private corporations are engaged in widespread spying on people in the U.S., especially activists. This spying can be used to control the population. This year, through the Pentagon's Minerva program, experiments were conducted to manipulate the public through social media. And investigative reporter Dr. Nafiz Ahmed recently exposed new tools that are being developed to track and possibly kill activists. Military conflicts are largely driven by access to dwindling fossil fuel reserves and other resources. Rather than promoting the development of sustainable energy sources, which would be produced locally and would reduce greenhouse gases, big oil's influence is fueling military escalation in Gaza, Iraq, and the Ukraine. We can expect future wars over water and arable land. So the climate convergence. The future is literally in our hands. Left unchecked, the global financial elite, blinded by greed, will take full control. The people must organize and put forward real solutions while preventing big business interests from taking advantage of and worsening the climate crisis. Popular resistance is supporting the New York City March and will form a contingent marching with the global climate convergence. At the Copenhagen Climate Conference in December 2009, people marched under a massive banner that read, "Another world is possible, another world is coming, another world is reality." The truth of that banner can be made real as together we write the future history of humankind. We do not underestimate the forces aligned against the transformation that is necessary, but nor do we underestimate the power of mobilized people in times of crisis. This September is another step in the march to a new reality. Thanks again for joining Critical Mass TV. We'll see you next time. Have a great night.